A multi-billionaire oil magnate sat in silence as arrogant Wall Street executives mocked his intelligence, confident he couldn't understand them without his translator. But when the Sheikh suddenly fired off a furious ultimatum in native Arabic, the executives froze in terror. Then, the lowly waitress clearing their plates cleared her throat. The crystal chandeliers of the St. Regis Hotel in New York cast a cold, diamond-hard light over the Astor suite. At $12,000 a night, the private dining room was reserved for kings, diplomats, and the kind of corporate titans who moved global markets before their morning espresso. Daisy adjusted the collar of her starched white uniform, her hands trembling slightly. At 26, she was supposed to be working in international diplomacy. She had spent 4 years in Amman, Jordan, working as a crisis negotiator and liaison for a highly respected international NGO. She had brokered deals between hostile factions and negotiated supply drops in war zones. But life had a cruel sense of humor. A devastating stroke had left her father requiring round-the-clock care, and the crushing weight of the American healthcare system had swallowed her modest savings in a matter of months. Now, instead of negotiating peace treaties, she was serving Wagyu beef to billionaires to keep her family afloat. "Listen to me, and listen carefully," Richard, the frantic floor manager, hissed as he paced behind the heavy mahogany doors of the suite. "Tonight is not a regular service. Inside that room is Roland Spencer." Daisy knew the name. Everyone in Manhattan finance knew Roland Spencer. He was the CEO of Vanguard Pinnacle, an apex private equity firm populated almost entirely by ex-Goldman Sachs partners and Ivy League alumni. He was notorious for his ruthless business tactics and his explosive temper. "Spencer is hosting Sheikh Tariq Al-Qasimi," Richard continued, dabbing his sweating forehead with a silk handkerchief. "The Sheikh is the chairman of one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the United Arab Emirates. Spencer is pitching a $4 billion infrastructure merger. If a fork clinks too loudly, if a wine glass is filled a millimeter too high, Spencer will have my head, and I will personally ensure you never work in hospitality again. Do you understand, Daisy?" "Perfectly, Richard," Daisy said, her voice steady and practiced. She picked up the heavy silver tray, loaded with flutes of imported sparkling water. "You are a ghost," Richard reminded her, opening the doors. "You do not speak. You do not make eye contact. You are furniture that serves food." Daisy glided into the room. The Astor suite was stiflingly opulent, smelling of expensive leather, Tom Ford cologne, and desperation. Roland Spencer sat at the head of the table. He was a silver-haired man in his late 50s, wearing a bespoke Brioni suit and a Rolex Daytona that caught the chandelier's light. Flanking him were his 2 top executives, David and Spencer, younger, equally ruthless replicas of their boss. Opposite them sat Sheikh Tariq Al-Qasimi. He was a striking man, likely in his early 50s, wearing a pristine white kandura and a traditional gutra. His face was unreadable, his dark eyes sharp and observant. Beside him sat a younger man with a notepad, Youssef, his official interpreter. As Daisy poured the water, she immediately sensed the toxic dynamic in the room. Roland was speaking in a loud, patronizing tone, treating the Sheikh less like a respected business partner and more like a massive, walking ATM. "You see, Youssef, please explain to His Excellency that our algorithmic trading models at Vanguard are completely insulated from regional market volatility," Roland said, gesturing wildly. He didn't even look at the Sheikh. He only made eye contact with the interpreter. Youssef nodded politely and translated the sentence into standard Arabic. The Sheikh listened, his face an impassive mask, and offered a brief, quiet reply in Arabic. "His Excellency understands," Youssef translated smoothly. but he inquires about the liquidity of the underlying assets in the fourth quarter. Roland rolled his eyes, a microscopic movement that Daisy caught as she served the Osetra caviar. "David," Roland muttered under his breath, turning slightly to his right. "Show him the projections, and keep it simple. I don't think this guy understands the complexities of Western derivatives. He's used to pulling money out of the sand." David smirked. "Right, let's dumb it down for the oil money." Daisy's hand tightened around the silver serving tongs. Her Arabic was flawless, specifically the Levantine and Gulf dialects she had immersed herself in for years. She knew perfectly well that the Sheikh, while perhaps not speaking fluent English, was a highly educated man. The sheer disrespect radiating from the vanguard executives made her stomach churn. For the next hour, the agonizing charade continued. Roland and his team presented their glossy pitch decks, smiling warmly at the Sheikh while slipping snide, degrading comments to each other in rapid-fire English. "Look at him staring at the prospectus," Spencer whispered to Roland as Daisy cleared the appetizer plates. "I bet he's just looking at the pictures. God, dealing with these Middle Eastern guys is exhausting. They just want their egos stroked." "Just keep smiling, Spence," Roland murmured, taking a sip of his Montrachet. "Once he signs the memorandum, we take our management fees and let his fund absorb the toxic debt. He's just a checkbook in a thobe." Daisy felt a flush of anger hit her cheeks. She kept her head bowed, stepping back into the shadows near the heavy velvet curtains. She looked at Sheikh Tariq. His eyes were fixed on the prospectus, but she noticed something the Wall Street wolves hadn't. His jaw was tight. His eyes weren't wandering. They were tracking Roland and Spencer's micro-expressions. He was absorbing the tone, the body language, and the unmistakable stench of arrogance. The main course arrived, perfectly seared Wagyu ribeye with truffle reductions. The tension in the room was beginning to shift. Roland was growing impatient. He had expected the Sheikh to be dazzled by the presentation and eager to commit to the $4 billion deal. Instead, the Sheikh had remained infuriatingly calm, offering only brief, non-committal responses through Youssef. "Listen, Youssef," Roland said, leaning over the table, his fake smile beginning to crack. "We need to secure a verbal commitment tonight. We have other institutional investors begging for a piece of this portfolio. Please impress upon the Sheikh that this is a fleeting opportunity. He needs to pull the trigger." Youssef turned to the Sheikh and translated the aggressive sentiment, softening the edges slightly out of respect. Sheikh Tariq slowly placed his silver fork on his plate. The soft clink seemed to echo in the massive suite. He picked up his linen napkin, dabbed his mouth, and then turned to Youssef. He spoke quietly, but firmly. Youssef looked surprised. He nodded, closed his notebook, and stood up. "His Excellency requests that I step outside for a moment to take a private phone call regarding his itinerary," Youssef said smoothly. "He wishes to review the final pages of the prospectus himself." Roland frowned, but forced a nod. "Of course. Tell him to take his time." Youssef bowed slightly and left the Astor suite, the heavy mahogany doors clicking shut behind him. The room was suddenly engulfed in a suffocating silence. Without the interpreter, the bridge between the two worlds was gone. Roland, David, and Spencer exchanged uneasy glances. "What's he doing?" David hissed under his breath. "Why did he send his mouthpiece away?" "Relax," Roland muttered, taking a large gulp of his wine. "He probably just wants to pretend he can read the financial jargon. Let him play businessman for 5 minutes. We have him cornered anyway." Daisy stood motionless in the corner, holding a silver pitcher of iced water. Her heart was beginning to pound. She had a terrible sinking feeling that Roland Spencer had vastly underestimated the man sitting across from him. Sheikh Tariq flipped to the final page of the prospectus. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he closed the leather binder with a definitive, heavy snap. He looked up, locking eyes directly with Roland Spencer. The subservient, quiet demeanor was gone. The Sheikh's eyes were ablaze with an intense, calculating fire. Without warning, the Sheikh spoke. But he didn't speak the slow, measured Arabic he had used with Youssef. He fired off a rapid, aggressive, and highly technical barrage of Gulf Arabic. His voice boomed through the quiet room, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. It wasn't a question. It was an interrogation. Roland physically flinched, pressing himself back into his leather chair. "What?" he stammered, his arrogant facade shattering instantly. I don't." The Sheikh didn't stop. He leaned forward, tapping a heavy gold ring against the polished mahogany table, his voice rising in volume and intensity. He pointed a finger directly at the prospectus, rapid-fire Arabic pouring from his lips, demanding answers, dissecting the room with his tone alone. David and Spencer froze, like prey caught in headlights. "What is he saying?" Roland panicked, his face draining of color. "Where the hell is Youssef? Spencer, get out your phone. Open Google Translate." "It's not working," Spencer hissed, fumbling with his phone under the table, his hands shaking. "He's speaking too fast. The app can't pick up the dialect. It's just translating gibberish." The Sheikh stopped speaking. He glared at Roland, waiting for an answer. The silence that followed was agonizing. It was the silence of three powerful men, realizing they were entirely powerless. Your Excellency," Roland stammered, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "Me no understand. Youssef? We need Youssef." The Sheikh's eyes narrowed into slits of pure disgust. He asked one final sharp question in Arabic, his tone dripping with absolute authority. He crossed his arms, waiting. Roland was sweating profusely now. The multi-billion-dollar deal was slipping through his fingers in real time, and he had no idea why. He spun around in his chair, his eyes scanning the room in desperation until they landed on Daisy. "You!" Roland barked, his voice cracking with panic. "Waitress, don't just stand there like an idiot. Go get the manager. Find someone who speaks Arabic. Call the front desk. Call the damn UN if you have to. Move!" Daisy didn't move. She looked at Roland, his face red and contorted with fear and rage. Then she looked at Sheikh Tariq. She had understood every single word. The Sheikh hadn't been asking a simple question. He had just brutally deconstructed Vanguard's entire portfolio. He had asked, in highly sophisticated financial terminology, why the debt-to-equity ratio on page 42 didn't align with the offshore shell companies listed in the appendix. And more importantly, he had just informed them that he knew exactly what they had been whispering about him all evening. "Are you deaf?" Roland screamed at her, slamming his fist on the table. "Get out of here and find a translator before I ruin your pathetic life." Daisy slowly placed the silver water pitcher onto the mahogany sideboard. She smoothed down her white apron. She ignored Roland entirely and took 3 deliberate steps toward the center of the room. She looked directly into Sheikh Tariq's eyes. "Atatharia Sayede," Daisy said. Her voice was calm, clear, and rang out with flawless, unaccented Gulf Arabic. "Excuse me, sir." The effect was instantaneous. Roland, David, and Spencer stopped breathing. Their mouths literally dropped open. Daisy didn't break eye contact with the billionaire. She continued in perfect, high-level Arabic. "The executives cannot answer your question regarding the debt-to-equity ratio because they intentionally obscured the toxic assets in the Cayman subsidiaries. They were hoping your interpreters would miss the discrepancy in the footnotes on page 42. The silence in the Astor suite was absolute. You could hear the faint ticking of Roland's Rolex. Sheikh Tariq sat back in his chair, the furious tension drained from his face, replaced by an expression of profound shock. He looked at the young woman in the waitress uniform, staring at her as if she had just fallen from the sky. Roland Spencer, completely oblivious to what had just been said, but recognizing the shift in power, stared at Daisy with wide, terrified eyes. "What?" Roland choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "What did you just say to him?" Before Daisy could answer Roland, Sheikh Tariq leaned forward, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He ignored the terrified Wall Street executives entirely and spoke directly to the waitress. "And tell me, little ghost," the sheikh replied in rapid Arabic, his eyes locked onto hers. "How does a woman who serves water know more about forensic accounting than the men who claim to rule this city?" The crystal chandeliers above seemed to dim as the sheer weight of Daisy's revelation settled over the Astor suite. She stood tall, the crisp white cotton of her uniform feeling less like a servant's livery and more like armor. "I was not always a ghost, Your Excellency," Daisy answered in flawless, melodic Arabic, her voice steady despite the adrenaline roaring in her ears. "Before my father suffered a severe aneurysm, forcing me back to the United States to manage his medical care at Mount Sinai Hospital, I spent 4 years in Amman. I was an international crisis negotiator for the Global Relief Initiative. Tracking misappropriated funds and navigating deceit was my daily reality. I know a predatory financial structure when I see one." Sheikh Tariq's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of profound respect crossing his usually impassive features. He looked at the waitress, no, the negotiator, standing before him. "What is she saying?" Roland Spencer suddenly exploded, his panic violently breaking the spell. He pushed himself out of his heavy leather chair, his face a splotchy, furious crimson. "Spencer, David, do something! Get the hotel manager in here right now! This bitch is trying to ruin the deal!" Spencer fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so violently he dropped it onto the plush carpet. David sat frozen, staring at Daisy as if she were holding a live grenade. "You!" Roland pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Daisy. "I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling, you little nobody, but you are done. I'm going to have you blacklisted from every establishment in this city. I'll sue you for corporate espionage. You are going to rot in debt for the rest of your miserable, pathetic life." Daisy didn't flinch. Years of sitting across from warlords in conflict zones had inoculated her against the temper tantrums of soft, overprivileged men in bespoke suits. She simply turned her head, looked at Roland with absolute pity, and then turned back to the sheikh. "Mr. Spencer is currently threatening to destroy my life and falsely accuse me of corporate espionage," Daisy translated calmly into Arabic. "He is doing this because he is terrified you will realize that Vanguard Pinnacle's fourth quarter liquidity is tied entirely to a shell corporation registered in the British Virgin Islands, heavily laden with toxic, unrecoverable debt." Sheikh Tariq al-Qasimi leaned back in his chair. He slowly laced his fingers together, resting his hands on his lap. He looked at Roland, who was practically hyperventilating, and then looked at Daisy. Then the sheikh began to laugh. It wasn't a polite, social chuckle. It was a deep, resonant, and genuinely amused laugh that echoed off the mahogany walls. It was the sound of a predator watching its prey step willingly into a steel trap. Roland stopped yelling. The laughter unnerved him more than the Arabic. "Your Excellency!" Roland choked out, forcing a desperate, sickly smile. It's a misunderstanding. This girl is insane. We can explain everything through Youssef when he returns." The sheikh's laughter subsided, replaced by an expression of glacial, unyielding coldness. He picked up his linen napkin, wiped a microscopic drop of condensation from his water glass, and placed the cloth precisely on the table. "That will not be necessary, Mr. Spencer," Sheikh Tariq said. Roland froze. Spencer gasped audibly. David gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. The words hadn't been spoken in Arabic. They had been spoken in perfect, unaccented, Oxford-educated English. The baritone resonance of the Sheikh's voice commanded the room with absolute, terrifying authority. You, Roland stammered, his brain short-circuiting as reality fractured around him. "You speak English?" "I hold a master's degree in global macroeconomics from the London School of Economics and a doctorate in international law from Oxford," the Sheikh replied, his tone conversational, but laced with lethal intent. "So yes, Mr. Spencer, I speak English. I also speak French, Mandarin, and Urdu. But most importantly tonight, I speak the language of arrogant, deceitful men." The blood completely drained from Roland's face. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting for gravity to take hold. "Every word," Sheikh Tariq continued, standing up slowly to his full height. "Every whispered insult, every patronizing comment. He's just a checkbook in a thobe. Was that the phrase you used, Mr. Spencer? Or perhaps it was, he's used to pulling money out of the sand." Roland tried to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak escaped his throat. The sheer weight of the hard karma crashing down upon him had paralyzed his vocal cords. "I knew about the toxic debt in your Cayman subsidiaries before my private jet even landed at JFK, the Sheikh said, stepping away from the table. "My forensic auditors at Deloitte spent the last 3 weeks dissecting Vanguard's portfolio. I did not come here tonight to sign a $4 billion merger. I came here to look the man who tried to defraud my people in the eye. I wanted to see exactly what kind of coward I was dealing with." The door to the Astor suite burst open. Richard, the frantic hotel floor manager, rushed in, flanked by 2 burly security guards in dark suits. "Mr. Spencer, I am so sorry," Richard cried, taking in the chaotic scene. He glared at Daisy. "I told you to serve the water and remain invisible. You are fired, Daisy. Escort her off the premises immediately." One of the security guards reached for Daisy's arm. "Take your hand off her," a voice barked from the doorway. It was Youssef, the interpreter. He stepped into the room, no longer holding a notepad, but a sleek leather briefcase. He walked directly to the Sheikh's side, his demeanor entirely transformed from a subservient translator to a sharp, commanding legal professional. "Do not touch her," Sheikh Tariq commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. "If any of your staff lays a finger on this young woman, I will purchase this entire hotel by sunrise and have you all removed by the NYPD for trespassing." The security guard immediately dropped his hands and took 3 rapid steps back. Richard turned a sickly shade of grey, stuttering incoherently. "Youssef is not my interpreter," the Sheikh explained, looking down at Roland's trembling form. "Youssef is the chief legal counsel for our sovereign wealth fund. He just stepped outside to conference with the Securities and Exchange Commission." Spencer let out a pathetic whimper, burying his face in his hands. David looked like he was about to vomit on the Persian rug. "You see, Mr. Spencer," Youssef said in flawless English, opening his briefcase. "Attempting to knowingly sell severely compromised, heavily leveraged debt as a Tier 1 infrastructure asset to a foreign national fund crosses the line from aggressive business into federal wire fraud. We have forwarded all of Vanguard's internal emails, which we legally acquired during our due diligence phase, to the regulatory authorities." You set me up," Roland whispered, his empire of lies collapsing into dust. "You ruined me." "No, Roland," Sheikh Tariq said softly. You ruined yourself. You underestimated everyone in this room. You underestimated me because of my attire and my culture. And you underestimated this brilliant young woman because she was wearing an apron. The Astor Suite was silent once more, but the power dynamic had been entirely inverted. The Wall Street predators had been utterly declawed, exposed as frauds, and handed a one-way ticket to federal prosecution. Sheikh Tariq turned his back on the ruined executives, dismissing them from his reality entirely. He walked over to Daisy, who was still standing tall, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The Sheikh looked at her carefully, his dark eyes analyzing the quiet strength radiating from her. "You stepped into the line of fire," the Sheikh said softly, speaking to her in Arabic once more, a sign of deep respect. "You had nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking up. Why did you do it?" Daisy took a deep breath. "Because I spent 4 years watching corrupt men steal food and medicine from the vulnerable, Your Excellency. I promised myself when I left the Middle East that I would never stand silently in the shadows while men like Roland Spencer lied to line their own pockets. A uniform does not strip a person of their integrity." A genuine, warm smile broke across the Sheikh's face. It was the first real emotion he had shown all evening. He reached inside the breast pocket of his crisp white kandura and withdrew a heavy, solid gold business card. He held it out to her. Daisy hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking it. The metal was cool and heavy in her palm. It bore no title, only his name and a private international number. "I have a philanthropic division within my wealth fund that handles global crisis relief and infrastructure development in devastated regions," the Sheikh said, switching back to English so the Vanguard executives could hear every word. "We are currently restructuring our operations in Geneva. We need a director of international compliance and negotiation, someone who cannot be intimidated, someone who speaks the truth even when they are surrounded by wolves." Daisy stared at the gold card, her vision blurring slightly. The crushing weight of her father's medical bills, the endless double shifts, the agonizing feeling of her brilliant mind going to waste in a hotel dining room. It all seemed to suspend in mid-air. "The position comes with an 8-figure operational budget," the Sheikh continued, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "A 7-figure base salary. And most importantly, comprehensive, unrestricted global medical coverage for your immediate family. We have partnerships with the finest neurological specialists in Switzerland. Your father will have the best care the world has to offer." Roland let out a ragged, choking gasp from his chair. He was watching a waitress being handed a life he could only dream of, directly after she had orchestrated his total destruction. The vindication was absolute. "My private jet departs from Teterboro Airport at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, destined for Geneva," Sheikh Tariq said, looking directly into Daisy's eyes. "If you are tired of being a ghost, Miss Daisy, I suggest you be on it." Daisy looked down at her white uniform. She reached behind her back, her fingers finding the knot of the starched apron. With one swift, decisive pull, she untied it. She let the apron fall to the floor of the Astor Suite, a stark white flag of surrender to the life she was leaving behind. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She had been reborn. "I will be there, Your Excellency," Daisy said, her voice ringing with the authority of the negotiator she truly was. "And I prefer my tea with 1 sugar during flights." The Sheikh chuckled, a warm, approving sound. "Youssef, make a note of the director's preferences." "Already done, sir," Youssef replied with a grin. Without another word to the shattered men at the table, Sheikh Tariq al-Qasimi and his legal counsel turned and walked out of the Astor Suite. Daisy stood there for a moment. She looked at Richard, the manager, who who was staring at her with his jaw practically unhinged. She looked at Spencer and David, who were staring blankly at the wall, their careers over. And finally, she looked at Roland Spencer, the man who had thought he owned the world. Roland looked up at her, his eyes red and brimming with terrified tears. "Please," he whispered. Daisy didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply offered him the cold, professional stare she used to reserve for corrupt warlords. "You should really read the footnotes, Mr. Spencer," Daisy said quietly. She turned on her heel and walked out of the heavy mahogany doors, leaving the ruins of Vanguard Pinnacle behind her, stepping out of the shadows and walking straight into the light. Did you love watching this arrogant billionaire get exactly what he deserved? Daisy's epic comeback proves that true power isn't about the suit you wear, but the courage to speak up when it matters most. If this story of brutal, hard karma and ultimate vindication gave you chills, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist, and subscribe for more incredible revenge stories.